Welcome to The Purpose of This Book with David G. and David G. Tonight, we are continuing the chapter to Wives. We are on page 106, second full paragraph. And David, I think we're just going to jump in tonight.
Yeah, absolutely. Please.
Okay. So here we go with new content. Second paragraph, 106. We have tried to hold the love of our children for their father. We have told small tots that father was sick, which was much nearer the truth than we realized. They struck the children, kicked out door panels, smashed treasured crockery, and ripped the keys out of pianos. In the midst of such pandemonium, they may have rushed out threatening to live with the other woman forever. In desperation, we've even got tight ourselves, the drunk to end all drunks. The unexpected result was that our husbands seemed to like it.
I do have crockery, which is earthenware or pottery, and tight means drunk.
Hey, except
Yeah, I love old writings like this. Well, it's not that old, 80 plus years old, but using terminology like treasured crockery. Like, does anyone have any treasured crockery laying around right now that they would like to show on the screen? Anyone? Anyone? Oh, June does. Okay. All right. No, so does Charlotte. Never mind. Bad analogy. I should have known. I do not have anything like that. And I know, but these are things like up to this point in the text here in Two Wives, which is we know that Bill wrote this, like he did a lot of the chapters in all the chapters in the big book, because Bill wanted to write, for alcoholics by alcoholics, and that's why he wrote the Big Book of Alcoholics Anonymous, and to make a lot of money too, by the way, and that's another reason why I wrote this chapter. But all these things are identifiable for me. Yeah, look for similarities, not differences. Like I didn't rip keys out of pianos, and I didn't smash treasure crockery, and I didn't strike my children or anything like that. But I did a lot of other things too. So just looking for similarities, not differences. And these are heartbreaking for me. They wrench my stomach still. That when I take a drink, and I know that I have no power, no choice to control, all bets are off on my behavior. All bets. Is beyond what we talk about the terminology of unmanageability. It is actually insane behaviors, which and that I put family members through. So, are we like tornadoes wreaking havoc in their lives? My experience is absolutely so. Yes. Good, David.
yeah, I'll just add, there's another list of harms here, right? I think in recent, maybe last week or the week before, we went back to the harms at 82. So for those of you who love tying the pieces together, here right on 106, some harms that the drunks have done to their families: striking the children, kicking out door panels, smashing treasured crockery, right? The worst offense, ripping the keys out of pianos. And then back on 82, I think that's our original set of harms in the book. We had, in the bottom paragraph, 1, 2, 3, hearts are broken, sweet relationships are dead, affections have been uprooted, selfish and inconsiderate habits have kept the home in turmoil. Right? So we're getting a double down here. And again, this is the chapter written to wives. But as David talked about when we got into this chapter, we are to read this from both perspectives. One, to our spouse who's been having to deal with us, but also a little bit more, another sort of heavy dose of our behavior that we put upon, our spouses and our families, et cetera, during our illness. Next paragraph. Perhaps at this point, we get a divorce and took the children, we got a divorce and took the children home to father and mother. Then we were severely criticized by our husband's parents for desertion. Usually we did not leave. We stayed on and on. We finally sought employment ourselves as destitution faced us and our families.
I have desertion and destitution. Desertion is leaving or abandoning domestic obligation. Destitution is extreme poverty.
Yeah, those are good definitions too, because they relate perfectly to the paragraph and the time that Bill's talking about. people just didn't get divorced back then. You didn't leave no matter what. You didn't share your stories, even though no one had central air conditioning, of course. So the windows were open, the fighting was going on. People were, a guy was showing up, a husband was showing up drunk or being arrested all the time. But these are the situations that we put ourselves in. And if you think about the last sentence in that paragraph, she said, "We finally sought employment ourselves as destitution face us and our family. So we're gonna be homeless." So what did Lois do? Actually, they were living with her parents, and she got a job at Macy's. She got a job making $19 a week. And what was Bill doing? And back on page 6 in the second paragraph, he was stealing from her slender purse. And when he's using the word term slender purse, that doesn't mean it's what it looks like is actually that thin. There's nothing in it. So she was stealing from it, making $19 a week. Back in 1935, a quart of beer cost 57 cents. So Bill's drinking a lot more than a quart of beer, and he's drinking gin and bathtub gin, and he's drinking whatever he can get a hold on. And he's running up tabs at bars, and he's got to steal from her slender purse to pay off his tab so he can continue to drink at the delicatessens, get a bite to eat, and also at the bar. So this is what they have to do. And what else was I going to talk about there? We also talked about, what they talked about there is the in-laws are looking at you like, why can't you just stick it out here? Well, this is a threefold illness and no one knows about it, because if you haven't read the big book, you wouldn't know that. So it's not only hurting you physically and mentally, but emotionally too, and spiritually. You're being bankrupt. And I think more than anything else, I said this, the biggest sin I committed in my relationship with my wife is I continually stole her hope. That she was like, "Oh, finally he's not going to drink tonight," or "Finally he came home on a Friday and he's just not going to pull another stunt." And I was still her hope, and hope was explained to me as a vision beyond my present circumstances. So she had hope, but then I would get tight again, and I would steal her hope, and I would steal the kids' hope, and then she would have to go to her parents' house, and then my parents would be looking at me like, why, what kind of a wife are you? Like it's her fault now? So yeah, it's a sad situation. I relate to all these things. This is my life in a nutshell. Was my life 25 years ago. I'm so grateful that I don't live nothing like that today.
I don't think I have anything to add to that one, so I'm just going to go ahead and read the next. We began to ask medical advice as the sprees got closer together. The alarming physical and mental symptoms, the deepening pull of remorse, depression, and inferiority that settled down on our loved ones. These things terrified and distracted us. As animals on a treadmill, we have patiently and warily climbed, falling back in exhaustion after each futile effort to reach solid ground. Many of us have entered the final stage with its commitment to health resorts, sanitariums, hospitals, and jails. Sometimes there was screaming delirium and insanity. Death was often near.
I have a couple.
Anything?
Yeah. I have Paul, which is a gloomy atmosphere. Futile, which is useless or producing no result. And sanitariums are institutions for treatment of chronic diseases.
Yeah, so this paragraph too is progression, and it's also at the bottom of page 106. In that bottom part of that paragraph, we talk about depression and inferiority that settled down. It's part of the spiritual malady on the page 107 top paragraph. Like it's like an animal on a treadmill. We have patiently and wearily climbed, falling back into exhaustion after each futile effort to reach solid ground. There is no such thing as solid ground. I have no power, no choice, no control. I cannot get sober on my own power. And it says most of us enter the final stage with this commitment to where is this? This is progression. And Bill, I'm gonna relate it to, I'm gonna connect some dots here into Bill's story because it's one of my
Yeah.
favorite paragraphs in Bill's story. Most of us enter the final stage with the commitment to health resorts, sanitariums, hospitals, and jails. Sometimes we were screaming delirium and insanity. Death was often near. So very true. But one of my favorite paragraphs, if you guys want to hang on to that page, go to page 8 in Bill's story in the very first paragraph. It is one of the greatest description of alcoholism in the grips, in the progressive, in the chronic stages of this illness that I have ever seen in my entire life, and I relate to it 100%. First full paragraph. No words can tell the loneliness and despair I found in the bitter morass, and morass is like a swamp of self pity, quicksand stretched around me in all directions. I had met my match. I've been overwhelmed. Alcohol was my master. Dude, that is a powerful, powerful paragraph and is a great description of what it like to be in the chronic and progressive stages with absolutely no hope of pulling myself out of that quicksand. Think about I mean, I grew up with black and white TV in the 60s and I used to watch Tarzan, and Tarzan would fall into a quicksand. And if it wasn't for, was it Cheetah? Get him a rope. But the more you move, the farther down you sink. It's a scary thing. It's a perfect description of what our lives look like. But I got three options here. And this is my only these three options happen for me when I get to a place where I can see to my innermost self that I'm a real alcoholic, which is on page 30. I can get sobered up, I can get locked up, been locked up, or I can get covered up. And before I get to the part of conceding my innermost self, I don't have a choice. I'm going to continue to get locked up. I'm eventually going to get covered up. We all know people who have been covered up. Today, I know how to stay sober with the guidance of a power greater than myself, a big book sponsor, the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, and the service. So the three sides of the triangle for the unity here today. And I don't have to die from the disease of alcoholism anymore. And I don't have to drag anybody else into that same thing that Bill's describing and all this stuff to the wives. My family doesn't live like that any longer, too.
Yeah, David did a nice job of breaking that down there and taking us back to page 8. Oh, you know what? Take my note here. Okay. And so I think just to double down a little bit on the progression here, what you see with this callback to Bill's story, and there's a very clear parallel here. What you're probably experiencing as we're studying Two Wives, or I hope you're experiencing, if you haven't studied these later chapters before, is that I'm not sure that Bill introduces a tremendous amount of new content, right? Certainly here and there. But what I think we find is it's a lot of the reapplication of these concepts that he's brought up earlier in the book. And again, as I pointed out, these are directed to a new audience, right? These are intended to be read by, the wife, the husband, the partner, we'll call it. What it looks like for the family afterwards, for our employers and prospective employers. But it's also about coming back around and solidifying the experience that we've had. As Bill is continuing to talk about the illness here, and he's gonna really hammer that as we continue to go through here. I mean, coming up on page 108, we get into these great categories of different kinds of alcoholics. He's going to be reintroducing concepts to go back to, his story more about alcoholism, but he's going to do it in sort of a new perspective and some new detail, which is cool. So, I guess we'd also be interested, as you guys are studying along with us, make notes and share them at the end of the meeting. If you come up with some other good callbacks to some spots in the book that we don't bring up, please share those with us, because we love bouncing around the book and having all those cross references. So we certainly don't have all of them noted. Okay. First paragraph in 107. Under these conditions, we naturally made mistakes. Some of them rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. Sometimes we sensed dimly that we were dealing with sick men. Had we fully understood the nature of the alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. Nothing, Em?
Nothing. So I'll go. So in that paragraph, under these conditions, under these predicaments, we naturally made mistakes. Some of them rose out of ignorance of alcoholism. So if I don't know what alcoholism is, see, I always thought maybe I'm the only one in the room that thought this, but that's the guy underneath the bridge with the brown bag and the raincoat, right? Nope, that's not true. I'll go to a spot in the book, which is a qualifying statement for me, which is on you want to get ready to go to, it's on page 44. It's in the first paragraph. And this covers this page here for me. So it says sometimes we sense dimly that we were dealing with a sick man. I put the word very sick. Very sick, meaning not only physically and mentally, but also spiritually. Had we fully understood the nature of alcoholic illness, we might have behaved differently. So, just in a nutshell, a snapshot of what alcoholism may look like, the cheater's form, or whatever you want to do. I call it a qualifying statement to a new person. If I'm going to take them to the work here, I'll take them aside after the meeting and I'll go to this page. And it's on page 44. It's in We Agnostics, first paragraph. In the preceding chapters, we have learned something of alcoholism. We hope we made clear the distinctions between the alcoholic and the non-alcoholic. Everything I've studied up to this point will give me proof that I either am or I am not. And then this is a statement that we will turn into a question. David, and I'll put it in third person here. David, when you honestly want to, you find you cannot quit entirely. So that means the obsession of the mind, greater part of this illness. Can I quit entirely? So can I stop and stay stopped? Or if when you're drinking, which is you have little control of the amount you drink, that's the allergy. That means I break out in craving once I drink. So once I stop, can I stay stopped? And once I start drinking, can I control or manage the amount I drink? And the answer for me is no and no. Then it answers the question right after that. It says, little control over the amount you drink, you're probably alcoholic. And Bill's being a little liberal there. I am a real alcoholic. And I can go other places in the book and show you what alcoholic is. If that be the case, and I can't leave this paragraph out, this end of this paragraph, because this is so important that I know what the solution is. If that be the case, you suffering from an illness, which please circle the word only a spiritual experience will conquer. I need to know. That's the only thing we're offering here in the 12-step fellowship is a spiritual experience. But it works every single time for everybody who's honestly and thoroughly and live in the discipline, do the work, live in the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12, the dictates of them things. And you too do not have to. Then you can have the freedom that we talked about in working with others, the freedom from addiction or whatever your drug of no choice is, and freedom from the bondage of self, which was my real problem is. Two freedoms that I get to experience when I do this work, but I do this daily because I have a daily reprieve and it's contingent on the maintenance of my spiritual condition. So I don't have to be ignorant when it comes to alcoholism. And I can teach that to other people. And I can understand that they're very sick people. I'm not taking that for granted ever, ever, ever. Like, oh, and people used to say, right? That frothy emotional appeal. Why don't you just stop for her or him, right? They meant well. I know the truth. That does not work. I need to have a spiritual experience, but I need to know the truth. I need to know what the problem is, and I need to know what the solution is. I need to know what the practical program of action is. And that's what this book has to offer for me.
Hmm. So what are we getting out of this chapter as Bill is talking about all of these we's are intended to be from the perspective of the wife or the spouse, right? So we're trying to hold on to the love of the children, to use that as leverage. We're seeing the husband, or the alcoholic spouse cause all this damage. Maybe we divorced them. Things got so bad for us in the family. Started to ask the doctor, is my spouse going to die, etc. And that we get drunk over stuff. We're sort of losing our minds as the spouses here. What I believe Bill is trying to paint for us is this sense, remember again, 1939, we didn't have Al Anon yet, that how this illness is a family illness and that other people around us can be, often are, spiritually ill as well. So with respect to another parallel of how the alcoholic in their spiritual illness, now the spouse of the alcoholic in their spiritual illness, we've got the second sentence here. Sometimes we sensed dimly that we were dealing with sick men. Well, I hear dimly, and you know what it makes me think of? Vaguely. So I go back to page 36. Our buddy Jim, the car salesman, just about into his cups. Page 36, second paragraph. Suddenly, the thought crossed my mind that if I were to put an ounce of whiskey in my milk, it couldn't hurt me on a full stomach. I ordered a whiskey and poured it into the milk. I vaguely sensed I was not being any too smart. I felt reassured as I was taking the whiskey on a full stomach. To the alcoholic, to the addict, sick as we are, to the people around us who have gotten sick, these are only dim senses. These are only vague senses. It's like the person at the end of the hallway whispering, we can barely hear. Right? This is the only reveal we get in the spiritual malady. We rarely get the smack on the back of the head that says, hey, notice this thing. No, we're too caught up in the chaos. And the same thing happens to the people around us. Back on 107, second paragraph. How could men who love their wives and children be so unthinking, so callous, so cruel? There could be no love in such persons, we thought. And just as we were being convinced of their heartlessness, they would surprise us with fresh resolves and new attentions. Remember Bill resolves his wife, and she's like, "Whoo, thank God." She buys it. She believes it, right? Maybe we'll go back there. For a while, they would be their old sweet selves, only to dash the new structure of affection to pieces once more. Asked why they commenced to drink again, they would reply with some silly excuse or none. It was so baffling, so heartbreaking. Could we have been so mistaken in the men we married? When drinking, they were strangers. Sometimes they were so inaccessible that it seemed as though a great wall had been built around them. Nothing? Okay, go ahead, David.
Yeah, so but David said it, so he set me up. I'm going to go to it. It's in Bill's story. It's on page 5. And this is when we read Bill's story. I'm going to read Bill's story like this. Did I drink, think, or feel like Bill, so I can relate to it? And the first 8 pages of Bill's story is what it was like. And I'm trying to look for similarities here. On page 5, in the 4th paragraph, related to this paragraph that David just read to us here, he says, "I woke up. This had to be stopped. I saw I could not take so much as one drink. I was through forever. Anyone else? Solemn vows? Told myself, looking in the mirror? Swear to God, I'm done. I meant it, right? Before then, I had written lots of sweet promises, wrote all kinds of entries in the family Bible, Bill did. But my wife happily observed that this time I meant business. And so I did. Wait for it. Shortly afterward, I came home drunk. That is my story in a nutshell. There had been no fight, no power, no choice, no control. Where had been my high resolve, which is willpower? Where's that at? I simply did not know. And he does not know. And I don't know. It hadn't even come to my mind. Someone had pushed a drink my way and I had taken it. Suddenly, David just talked about Jim. Suddenly showed up and I picked up the drink without no power, no choice, no control. Was I crazy? I began to wonder, for such an appalling lack of perspective seemed near being just that. That's insanity. There is no clear thinking there whatsoever. So I'm going to leave it at that and go back to page 107 here, too, what David just read. Was it in second full paragraph? Oh, yeah. Okay. So I have I was going to bring up too, and David brought up something too about Al-Anon, and Al-Anon I think was formed in like 1951, and Lois was a big part of it. But it wasn't the only people who were meeting as groups through the United States, because there was meetings, AA meetings everywhere. But families were getting together and having groups. But Lois kind of initiated the whole thing and called it Al-Anon. This is kind of an interesting fact about Lois and her family. Lois's family was really normal, like a high society. I believe her father was a gynecologist and a surgeon, and her mother was an art. I can't remember what mom did. I should have a note for that. I'm trying to go off of memory, and I'm not doing good. But here's my note that I do have. Lois remembers her childhood, and this is so much different than the life that she ended up getting. Right, being married to Bill. Lois remembered how loving and how warm her parents were, and how she wanted one day to have a home like the one she grew up in. Man, think about that.
Mm.
But did she fulfill that dream? You bet she did. Later on, when Bill got sober, because you know what Bill did when he got sober? Bill hung around with a lot of AA people when he got sober. He went to meetings a lot. He hung around with drunks a lot. And he kind of ignored his wife. There needs to be a bunch of balance. But Lois took it upon herself and to start to have groups for herself. And I think she lived to be like 97 years old. So she outlived Bill by, I don't know, 17 or 27 years. Again, I'm sorry that I'm just throwing random numbers out here. But she lived a long, long time, and she lived a very healthy life almost to her death. So she, started Stepping Stones, and she's like worked for the YWCA. I mean, she was a woman who really ended up being very, very, very helpful to a lot of thousands of people. So, although she couldn't have kids of her own, and although she didn't get that picket fence and two cars in the garage kind of thing with Bill, she did get a fulfillment, and she did because I believe she did, and I haven't read her book, but I believe that's in her book that she states stuff like that. So I just wanted to bring that up because I just thought it was interesting. The kind of person that she was pretty remarkable.
I mean, the crux of this paragraph, guys, is what was introduced to us back on Roman numeral 28 in the doctor's opinion, when he's describing the allergic types. And you can go there if you want. I'm just gonna read part of it real quick. He's describing the allergic types. These allergic types can never safely use alcohol in any form at all, and once having formed the habit, found they cannot break it. Once having lost their self-confidence, their reliance upon things human. That's what this paragraph is really about. That the reliance on things human are not enough either to break my allergic reaction, or as we get into the mental obsession further down, human power, human reliance, including my own, is incapable from keeping me from picking up again. That's exactly what's going on here. So, like, first of all, it's saying, how could men who love their wives and children be so unthinking, so callous, so cruel? How could we, as parents, as partners, get drunk and smash crockery and slap our children or each other? How could we do this? The supposition here is that if you love me, you wouldn't do this. David talked about the frothy emotional appeal. And then, so we get snapped out of there's a little bit of maybe a little guilt, a little bit of love peeking through, a little bit of something. It's like, okay, sorry, I'm gonna take it easy on the drinking. And it works for a short period of time. This is what it's describing. And then what happens? Well, we know what happens. The mental powerless didn't go away. It might have gone on a very brief vacation, but it didn't go away. The obsession kicks in, the compulsion kicks in, and we pick up again. Right? So we're our old sweet selves for a little while, which I don't even know if that's the truth, right? How sweet were we when we didn't have our bottle? Probably not so much. And then we pick up again and ask why they commence to drink again. They would reply with some silly excuse or none. No excuse is even better, right? Like just being totally perplexed. And why is there no excuse to offer? Because none of us understood the nature of our illness until we had it explained to us out of this book. Right? Until that point, we don't have any better understanding why we kept picking up than anybody else. Bottom paragraph on 107. And even if they did not love their families, how could they be so blind about themselves? What had become of their judgment, their common sense, their willpower? God, this is just like a blow-by-blow retelling of Bill's story, guys, right? It's all these things he asked himself or said to himself. Why was it? Excuse me, why could they not see that drink meant ruin to them? Why was it when these dangers were pointed out that they agreed and then got drunk again immediately? Go ahead, David.
Oh, let's take that last where the period is and go to page 24, and there's a solution in the first paragraph. In the italic writing, we know when we see squiggly writing in the big book, we should pay attention. Joe and Charlie says. I'll wait for you to get there. The fact is that most alcoholics, for reasons yet obscure, have lost the power of choice to drink. Our so-called willpower becomes practically non-existent. We are unable, at certain times, to bring into our consciousness with sufficient force the memory, the suffering, and the humiliation even a week or a month ago. We are without defense against the first drink. So going to meetings and just not drinking is not going to cut it for this alcoholic. Not by any means. Yeah, maybe in the first week, but I better get myself a big book sponsor, because what David pointed out here is this is Bill just sharing his through the eyes of this woman's persona, his story. It's really Bill's story here is what he's sharing here, and the answer is that I got no power, no choice, no control, and it's not that I don't love my wife and my kids, but they're talking about here about the wife. How could she be so blind? Well, my wife, I know that she's safer because of my kids. I knew that, and maybe a little bit of pride.
Mm.
But what had become back then in 107 in the bottom paragraph? What had become of her judgment, her common sense, their willpower? There was a plan. I know she had a plan. She told me her plan after I got sober, and I wasn't included in her plan. I promise you that. Nor should I be. And I had to prove myself to her that I was going to change. And all those changes that had to take place were all internal. None of this external stuff. Apologies had to end. Sweet sorries don't work any longer. It's about action and more action. And after a few 24 hours, to be honest with you, we started repairing the damage that had been done in our relationship. And we don't live like this anymore. The bottom of that paragraph on 107.3 says, why was it when these dangers were pointed out that they agreed and then got drunk again immediately? And I just read about that, on page 5 in Bill's story. And the reason, in the doctor's opinion that, we can't differentiate true from the false. This book is chock full of the information that I need to carry this message to the alcoholic who still suffers. I am not creating a new mousetrap. Doesn't need to be done. But man, when I read this thing, it tells me more and more and more that I have no power, no choice, no control. That I desperately need the program, the 12-step program, and I desperately need God.
Yeah, I'll just, as I was reading this and I sort of made the comment about the parallels in Bill's story, and really it's more callbacks to page 5. We don't need to go back there again. But this paragraph is just, from the wife's perspective, asking the same questions that Bill asked himself and made those statements about himself. I held myself in such high regard. I was such a mover and a shaker. Everything was going my way. And now look at me, right? A drunk who can't accomplish anything. And these are our spouses asking the same questions, and our spouses just perplexed about why they don't understand why we can't see how we're killing ourselves. They think we ought to have our own human reliance. They don't understand that we don't have any more human power to get us healthy than they do. So why was it when these dangers were pointed out that they agreed and then got drunk again immediately? Because of what I took us back to on page Roman numeral 28 as well. Right? Basically at the bottom. This is the mental obsession that I cannot differentiate the true from the false, even though I know it's going to be injurious when I pick up anyway. My brain says this time's going to be different. Top of 108. These are some of the questions which race through the mind of every woman who has an alcoholic husband. We hope this book has answered some of them. Perhaps your husband has been living in that strange world of alcoholism, where everything is distorted and exaggerated. You can see that he really does love you with his better self. Of course, there is such a thing as incompatibility, but in nearly every instance, the alcoholic only seems to be unliving and inconsiderate. It's usually because he's warped and sickened that he says and does these appalling things. Today, most of our men are better husbands and fathers than ever before. Not than ever. Okay. I guess I just wanted to say one thing before we sort of dissect this paragraph a little. All of this repainting of the alcoholic, and the powerlessness, the physical and the mental, the obsession, the compulsion, all of this, and the repeated attempts to point out that, the love for the children couldn't do it, the love of the wives couldn't do it, the love of ourselves couldn't do it. David and I, if nothing, are broken records. We love using the same sort of analogies and metaphors and anecdotes in this whole pleading on behalf of the spouse, and do it for the children's sake. We bring this up a lot, and we always do this when we're in the co-ed units of the treatment center. And then you've probably heard us talk about this here too. There's no more powerful love on earth than the love a mother has for her children, whether we're talking with humans or in animals, right? There's just something special. It doesn't mean that dads don't have a great love for their children as well, but we know in nature it's something special when the female gives birth to their children. And as I look around at all the women in this meeting, I suspect most, if not all of you, have kids. And I suspect that most, if not all of you, drank while you had the kids and looked at your kids after a bad bender and said, boy, I'm never going to drink again. I'm going to put a picture of you, my beautiful children, on my fridge. And when I think about drinking, I'm going to look at the picture and it's going to keep me from drinking. You made those kinds of resolutions, and yet what happened? You drank again, right? My point in sharing this obvious story that I've heard from, I think, every woman I've known in AA, right, who's had kids, is not that you're bad moms. You were all great moms. You were very sick moms. That's the difference. No healthy mom would ever drink over her kids like that. But sick moms do, right? That's the point. Why couldn't you do it for him or her? Why couldn't you do it for the kids? Why couldn't you do it for the job? Why couldn't you do it for your health? Because we are desperately, terribly, deathly ill.
Yeah, and to David's point, and I brought this up here before. I lost my daughter to this disease 6+ years ago, and her birthday would have been Tuesday. She had been 40 years old, and she had a child that we raised from the age of 5, and he's in college now, 19 years old, and we're very close. I'm more than his grandfather. I'm probably his father because his father passed away almost a year to the date that his mother passed away. So he's without parents, and we were already taking responsibility of him. But that's not to say that these are bad people. I know that because I experienced what it was like when my daughter was when he was in the arms of my daughter. So she would come to my house to visit her son. And there is no love that I ever experienced like that love. She would kiss him up and hug him up and tell him what a beautiful kid. And she had little nicknames for him. They were so cute. And I would just tear up and just be so. And I teared up on Tuesday, obviously, because I, and when I called my grandson because he's away at college, and when he got done with his band practices and stuff on Tuesday night, I said, "Hey, I go, do you know today is mom's birthday?" And he goes, "I didn't know that." And I was thinking that's kind of heartbreaking, man, that you didn't know that. And the reason I guess I just never. He hasn't seen her in 6 years, almost 7 years now. And I got to refresh his memory that she is not a bad person. That we're not, yes, we're sick people, but it doesn't mean that we're bad people. We're just not. I mean, there are some sociopaths and psychopaths and stuff like that. We're going to get to that here in the book here shortly. But the thing about it is, it's like she wasn't that person. She was a very ill person in the chronic and progressive stages of this illness. And she used a needle, and it was the last time she was going to use it. But again, a love of a mother is just absolutely even my wife today with her kids and our grandkids, the amount of affection and attention, and you can see the hearts connect. You know what I mean? And I mean, I like maybe it's because I'm an alcoholic and I'm selfish and self-centered. Like I need a little David time, a little me time, a little free time away from everybody else. My wife doesn't need that. She loves surrounding herself with the family, and I do too, but not as much as she does. But so to the text on page 108, it talks about, and this is Bill. Bill's writing. He kind of gives himself up in this paragraph, as far as I'm concerned. He's kind of self-serving here with his statements. Halfway through the paragraph, he talks about perhaps your husband has been living in that strange world of alcoholism where everything is distorted and exaggerated. That's very, very true. You can see that he really does love you with his better self. I don't know if she can really see that or not. Of course, there is such a thing as incompatibility, but in nearly every instance, the alcoholic who seems to be unloving and considerate, it is usually because he is warped and sickened that he says and does these appalling things. So don't justify my bad behavior. My bad behavior is because I have no power, no choice, no control. I either make a decision and concede to my innermost self that I'm a real alcoholic and do this work, or I go on to the bitter end, blotting out the conscience of my intolerable situation the best I can, or access spiritual help. That is really the two alternatives that page 25 offer me. And then the bottom of that, the last sentence in that paragraph is a promise. Today, most of our men are better husbands and fathers than ever before. And
Mm,
I can attest to that. I'm a
mm,
pretty darn good dad and a pretty darn good father. Now I'm not in the league my wife is a mother and a wife. I'll tell you that. I have a lot of room, a lot of growing to do yet, but she's a pretty darn good demonstration of how to do that. I got to say, and I admire that. And I let her know quite often how proud I am of that. But that is a paragraph of hope too. But it's only for me if I'm not in untreated alcoholism. Because if I'm in untreated alcoholism, page 62, the selfish self-centeredness, the roots of my troubles will rule me, and I will not be able to be of usefulness for other people. The bedevilments to come true for me, my life will become unmanageable. And then again, the obsession will come back, and I have no power, no choice, and control, and I'll pick up a drink and off to the races I go again.
mm. Yeah, I just want to add one minor point here. In that paragraph, second sentence, or well, let me read the first two sentences again. These are some of the questions which race through the mind of every woman who has an alcoholic husband. We hope this book has answered some of them. So that second sentence there suggests what? This might be the chapter to wives, but Bill is hoping that our spouses have read the entire book up to this point so that they really understand the true nature of our illness and maybe start to get a little comfort and solace, right? Really understanding that this is an illness and not that we were just bad guys and gals. So we ought not encourage our spouses just to jump to this chapter. Next paragraph. Okay, this is where it starts to get a little tricky. Bill starts at, Bill basically writing as Lois, not per se, but, basically writing as
Mm.
Lois, starts to ask some pretty tall requests. Try not to condemn your alcoholic husband no matter what he says or does. Okay, gentlemen, ladies, drunks, addicts, obsessive
Stop.
eaters, alcoholics, gamblers, whatever our problems are here. Could you imagine if you went to counseling with your normal spouse and the counselor looked at them and said, try not to condemn Janice or June or Trey, no matter what they say or do. How would that have gone over? Right? How would that have gone over? Like a turd in a punch bowl. Right? But this is what Bill, little self-serving, is asking of our spouses here. Try not to condemn your alcoholic husband. I'm going to say spouse here. We've got a lot of women here tonight. No matter what he says or does. He's just another very sick, unreasonable person. Treat him, when you can, as though he had pneumonia. When he angers you, remember that he is very ill. That is a very, very tough paragraph. It's a lot of asks, and I get why Bill's doing it for two reasons. Reason number one is he's an alcoholic trying to write as a non-alcoholic spouse, right? And like I said, it's a very tall order. The other thing he's trying to do, although I think he could have accomplished it in a better way, is he's really trying to paint we are sick, sick, sick. Right? But it's a lot to ask for these people that have loved us, how we've affected them, to not be angry with us or to not lash out at them or yell at them or be upset when they do crazy, foolish things. Someone would have to be a pretty huge spiritual giant not to be in some serious feels with our behavior. Go ahead, David. Oh, sorry, Ab, did you have any words? No, okay. Go ahead, David.
Yeah, I don't have a lot to add to this thing other than in the middle of that paragraph it says he's just another very sick, unreasonable person. So when it comes to alcohol, I'm insane. When it comes in untreated alcoholism, I'm insane. I cannot differentiate the truth from the false. So I don't know. Again, I love what David had to say about that. It's just a very self-serving statement, paragraph in general that Bill says. But then the last thing it says, when he angers you, remember that he's very ill. So, how many times did I do this 3 times or 4? Only 5 times? No, I did this all the time. And this
Yeah.
disease is chronic and it's progressive. So it's going to get worse. It's not going to get better.
Let's move on. I'm trying to expedite us towards these categories. I really like them a lot. I'm not sure we'll get through them all tonight, but at least we can get started on them, David. There is an important exception to the foregoing. We realize some men are thoroughly bad intentioned, that no amount of patience will make any difference. An alcoholic of this temperament may be quick to use this chapter as a club over your head. Don't let him get away with it. If you are positive he's one of this type, you may feel you had better leave. Is it right to let him ruin your life and the lives of your children? Especially when he has before him a way to stop his drinking and abuse if he really wants to pay the price.
I have foregoing, which is preceding or previous, and temperament, which is type of character, frame of mind, or disposition of a person as it affects his acts, words, etc.
Maybe I'll just jump in here, David.
Mhm.
What's nice about this paragraph, because again, David and I just sort of bashed the previous paragraph as being a little, slanted towards Bill's perspective. I like how he goes on in this paragraph to say, hey, listen, I just said you ought to go easy on your spouse, but if you are with someone, Bill is advising the spouse that's, I'm going to say dangerous, not just toxic, a word we like to throw around, but dangerous. And I don't think he meant just physically dangerous. I think he's talking about all forms of danger, right? Emotional, spiritual, mental, someone who's going to be damaging. Don't let him get away with it. Protect yourself is what Bill's saying. If you're positive he's one of this type, right, you may feel you better leave. Now, doesn't mean you can't come back. They can't come back. But for the moment, protect yourself. And then I love what he says here at the end. Is it right to let him ruin your life and the lives of your children? Well, we know the answer. That's a rhetorical question. We know the answer is no. But what does he follow up with? Especially when he has before him a way to stop his drinking and abuse if he really wants to pay the price. Guys, this is my constant experience of trying to work with newcomers. I've been trying to work with this wet guy out here who just won't stop drinking long enough to try to get on his spiritual experience. Like we talked to him and he's morose and he's sad and he's crying. We finally got him to the first step and then he disappeared again. And it's like, dude, I got a system. I got a design for living. I got a way you can get beyond the suffering. I just need you to do one thing. I need you to white knuckle like your life depends on it, because it does, for about a week or two. If you could just do that, man, we're going to get you over the hump. And so that's what Bill's saying here is, if somebody is really terrible, you got to split to protect yourselves. You should do that, especially if that alcoholic has been presented with the proper message, someone armed with the facts about themselves and armed with the information in this book, and says, hey man, you can get better. And if the alcoholic keeps refusing to accept that spiritual help, then doesn't it seem right those people around us, if when we're dangerous, ought to get some safe distance? I sure think so.
I agree. Yeah, and so middle of that paragraph there that David read, it says, don't let him get away with. Right before that, an alcoholic of this temperament would be quick to use this chapter as a club over your head. And I see Bill's direction here. Absolutely. I can see like, oh, you need to do this. You need to read this chapter. The whole point of reading this book is to read it in order. And I know my wife has never read the whole big book in order by any means, and that's okay. She doesn't need to, and I never even probably asked her to. But I have sponsees whose wife who did, and they read it in like a day, and they said, this is all you got to do? Why aren't you doing this? This seems like a really simple task on a daily basis. Just do this. And I was like, I'm going to study this the rest of my life and I'm going to come up short every day. But she gets it, But we're trying to read this thing a little bit differently because of the persona that sometimes two wives get in groups that we go to or I go to. And everybody's like, oh, chapter 2 wives. And we'll really get into that on page 111 when we start talking about principles of success, which is actually the third part of the 12 step, practicing these principles in all our affairs. So we can see the directions. We'll start reading the chapter a whole lot differently than I've ever read it before, because it's going to be looking, the fingers are going to be pointing back at me and how I can practice these principles in all my affairs. And the very last sentence in that paragraph that David read, especially when he has before him a way to stop his drinking, so he knows about the program of Alcoholics Anonymous and abuse. I'm sorry, especially if he when he has before him a way to stop his drinking and abuse if he really wants to pay the price. Here's the
Mm,
price. Go to
yeah.
page 14,
Recall.
top paragraph. Bill's story. This is when Bill's getting sober. Really simple paragraph. And it's simple. He even leads off with it. Simple but not easy. A price had to be paid. It means what? Destruction of self centeredness. I must, there's a must, turn. What am I going to do here? Turn. I'm at the turning point, step 3. I'm going to start working the steps 4 through 9 in all things to capital letters of the Father Light who presides over us all. This is about a relationship with power. On my own power, can I change myself internally? And my answer is absolutely not. I desperately need a power greater than myself in my life to do that for me. My responsibility is to continue to do this work here. But the price that has to be paid is doing the inventories, sitting down eyeball to eyeball with my sponsor, and sharing, finding out the things that are blocking me, my wrongs and my faults, so I know what to take to God in 6 and 7, make out my list in 8, be willing to make my amends to all the people, all my amends, and then go out and make my amends and then start living in the disciplines of 10, 11, and 12. That's the price that has to be paid. It's a very simple price to be paid, and the work isn't all that difficult. I just have to do it as though I have of the desperation of a drowning man, and or a desperation of a man in quicksand. And I am
Mhm.
both of those men when I came in here.
Bottom of 108. The problem with which you struggle usually falls within one of 4 categories. So here's category 1. Your husband may be only a heavy drinker. His drinking may be constant, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. Perhaps he spends too much money for liquor. It may be slowing him up mentally and physically, but he does not see it. Sometimes he is a source of embarrassment to you and his friends. He's positive he can handle his liquor, that it does him no harm, that drinking is necessary in his business. He would probably be insulted if he were called an alcoholic. The world is full of people like him. Still. Some will moderate or stop altogether, and some will not. Of those who keep on, a good number will become true alcoholics after a while. Nothing for Ab. Go ahead, David.
So Bill's give us more descriptions of what an alcoholic is. This is number 1. Your husband may be only a heavy drinker, so that means that he can, at times, as the book says, he can moderate on his own power, or he can control the amount he drinks. His drinking may be constant, top of page 109, or it may be heavy only on certain occasions. I went through the progressions of alcoholism. I did. I didn't immediately. I drank alcoholically the first time I drank, but I didn't drink every day alcoholically until I did. And then perhaps he spends too much money for liquor. Done all those things. It may be slowing him up mentally and physically. That happens. That's the progression of this disease. Uh, but he does not see it. I can. My perception of things, even today. That's why I have to have a sponsor, and I had running buddies in the program, because there's a book, New Pair of Glasses by Clant, right? Chuck C. Yeah, Chuck C. That tells me I need a new pair of glasses. I see things way differently than the rest of the world does. And sometimes I floor my sponsor when I bring these things up to him. He looks at me like, dude, that is, your vision is a little off. So it may be slowing him down mentally and physically if he doesn't, but he does not see it. Sometimes he's a source of embarrassment to you and your friends. Man, countless times. And I won't even tell the stories. You just imagine them. He's positive he can handle his liquor. That's denial. Bill doesn't use the word denial in the big book, but as absolutely denial that it does not, that it does him no harm. Lie. That drinking is necessary for his business. Delusional. That's delusional. He would probably be insulted if he were called an alcoholic. No, I don't think that. I think I was calling myself an alcoholic. I was kind of proud of that statement actually, as I was sitting taking my first shot at the end of the day, or in the middle of the day, or in the morning before I went to work. This world is full of people like him. Some will moderate or stop altogether, and some will not. So, you know what? Back to page 44, and I'm not going to go there, but if I can control the amount I drink, or if I can stop and say stop, then if you can say stop, then stop. Because I have qualified people in the past that can manage the amount they drink, and they find out they're not alcoholics. They don't need Alcoholics Anonymous. We have plenty of hard drinkers in the rooms of Alcoholics Anonymous that practice no principles in all their affairs. And they come in here and they say, put the plug in the jug and go to meetings. Trey's not his head because he goes to the same meetings that I go to, obviously. And it kind of drives me cuckoo. But at the same time is they don't know because they're probably just hard drinkers. And them just not drinking is easy enough for them to do. And they might have 20, 30 or more years than that even. He would probably be assaulted if he were called an alcoholic. This world is full of people like him. The rooms are full of people like him.
Yeah.
Some will moderate and stop altogether, and some will not. Of those who keep on, a good number will become true alcoholics. So they talked about early in the book about a potential alcoholic. This is what a potential alcoholic could be looking like.
Yeah, so just a couple of notes here, guys. So it talks about within one of four categories. I heard it like a doctor once referred to four kinds of alcoholics as mild, moderate, severe, and profound. And that's not from AA literature. I just thought those were four really good adjectives that really describe these four categories that we're going to get into: mild, moderate, severe, and profound alcoholics. And so these are, in the chapter here, it's saying your struggle usually falls within one of these four categories. And so what are really the categories of drinking behavior by our spouses? And there's at least a couple other spots in the book where we've got sort of groupings of alcoholics. If you want to make a note of this, you're probably familiar with both of these. Back on page Roman numeral XXX, Roman numeral 30, there's the classifications of drinkers that Dr. Silkworth describes. 5 of them, says these types and others, right? And then on page 20, in There Is a Solution, there's these different types of drinkers as well. And so there's 3 different lists here of different kinds of drinkers, different kinds of alcoholics. And, I don't know if that was intentional or just, if there was some sort of attempt at effectiveness to have these several different groupings. Doesn't matter. I think it's handy because I think it does a nice job of really coloring in how our drinking manifests, our addictions, our drugging, whatever it is, manifests. It can look differently among us. And as David talked about, it can be a progression. Right? And so, one of the last points that David made, and I'll just double down on that, is, speaking about the Fellowship of Alcoholics Anonymous, the rooms of AA are filled with a lot of heavy drinkers, certain type of hard drinkers that aren't sick in the way that a true alcoholic is. That's okay. We've got a third tradition that says, you got a problem with alcohol, you are welcome to be a member of the fellowship. But we go on to say in great detail in this book and in other literature, if you are a true alcoholic, a real alcoholic like I am, like I know David is, then you're probably beyond human help and you're going to need a spiritual experience. So you better get busy and do the work in this book. And therefore, sort of ipso facto, if you are in an AA meeting and you don't need to do this work because you're only a heavy drinker, please keep that to yourself. Don't kill somebody who needs to do all this work. Please. All right? Just hang out and be grateful that you're not as sick as the rest of us. On that note, I will wrap up the recording.